Hitting rock bottom isn't about the impact. It's about the people who watch you land. Claire had lost her home and her son to a woman in a black robe who barely looked up from her paperwork. Tonight, the tables have turned. She now holds that exact woman's world in her calloused, minimum-wage hands. The neon sign above the diner had been buzzing with a defective, high-pitched whine since October. Claire didn't hear it anymore. She only felt it, a faint vibration in her molars as she dragged a mop across the cracked linoleum. It was 2:14 a.m. The air inside smelled of stale fryer grease, industrial pine cleaner, and the metallic tang of old coffee burning on a hot plate. Her lower back ached. It was a dull, rhythmic throb that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. "Lock the back on your way out, Claire," Hank muttered, sliding his keys off the Formica counter. He didn't wait for an answer, just pushed through the glass door and let the damp Oregon night swallow him. Claire wrung out the mop. The water in the yellow bucket was the color of dirty pennies. She dumped it down the floor drain, grabbed her coat, a synthetic puffer that had lost its loft 3 winters ago, and shoved her swollen feet into damp sneakers. Outside, the rain wasn't falling so much as hovering in heavy, misting sheets. The parking lot was a minefield of potholes filled with oil-slicked water that reflected the red neon in jagged, bleeding lines. She pulled her hood up, the plastic zipper cold against her chin, and dug her keys out of her pocket. That was when she heard it. Not a cry, just a rhythmic, dull thumping. Claire stopped. She tightened her grip on her keys, sliding one between her knuckles. Living in a town where the primary exports were rust and meth made you paranoid. She turned her head. The sound was coming from the far end of the lot, near the overflowing dumpsters. A silver Lexus SUV sat idling, its hazard lights blinking in a lazy, out-of-time rhythm. Claire stood there for 10 seconds. The cold water seeped through the canvas of her right shoe, soaking her sock. "Don't look," a voice in her head said. "It's not your problem. Go home. Take a hot shower. Sleep." She took a step toward her rusted Honda. The thumping came again. Faster this time. Desperate. Claire swore under her breath, a harsh, jagged sound, and walked toward the Lexus. The driver's side door was wide open, the interior light casting a pale yellow glow over empty leather seats. A cell phone lay face down on the wet asphalt, a spiderweb of cracks across its screen. Rain pooled in the leather bucket seat. The driver was gone. She moved to the back window. It was tinted, but she cupped her hands over the glass, pressing her face against the cold surface. 2 faces stared back. They were small, identical, and smeared with tears. Twin girls, maybe 7 or 8 years old. One of them was banging a small fist against the glass. Claire pulled the rear door handle. Locked. "Hey!" she shouted over the drone of the rain. "Where's your parents? Where's the driver?" The girl closest to the window just shook her head, her mouth opening in a silent wail. Claire looked around the empty, sprawling darkness of the highway. Nothing, just the wind rattling the dead branches of the pines. She reached through the open driver's door, water dripping from her hood onto the pristine leather console, and hit the unlock button. The heavy doors clicked. Claire pulled the back door open. The heat of the car spilled out, carrying the scent of expensive vanilla perfume and new leather. The twins shrank back against the far door, clutching each other. They were wearing matching coats, camel-colored wool, soft and thick. Cashmere. "Where is who was driving you?" Claire asked, keeping her voice flat. She didn't want to smile. She was too tired to fake warmth. "Frank," the girl on the left whispered. Her voice was raspy. The tire went boom. Frank got out to look. He walked over there. She pointed a small, trembling finger toward the tree line beyond the dumpsters. He didn't come back. It's been a long time. Claire felt the hairs on her arms stand up beneath her damp coat. She backed away from the car and stared at the dark woods. A blown tire. A driver walking into the trees and not returning. It smelled wrong. It smelled like trouble. We're cold, the other twin said. The car engine suddenly shuddered, sputtered, and died. The dashboard lights flickered out. The heater died with it. They were out of gas. Claire closed her eyes. She wanted to walk away. She wanted her bed. She was 2 missed shifts away from eviction. Just call the cops, she thought. She pulled her own phone from her pocket. The screen was cracked, smeared with grease. She dialed 911. A tired dispatcher answered on the 3rd ring. County Dispatch. Yeah, I'm at the Starlight Diner on Route 9. Found an abandoned Lexus with 2 kids inside. Driver wandered off into the woods. Static crackled on the line. Route 9? Listen, ma'am, we got a mudslide on I-5 and a 12-car pileup. Every deputy I have is out there with the jaws of life. I can send a unit your way, but it's going to be at least 4 hours. Are the kids safe? They're freezing in a dead car, Claire snapped. Keep 'em warm. Wait for the unit. The line went dead. Claire stared at the phone. She looked at the girls. They were watching her with wide, terrified eyes. Out, Claire said, her voice rough. We aren't supposed to go with strangers, the Boulder twin said, her chin trembling. Good rule, Claire said, turning away. Stay in the freezing car in the dark. I'm going home. She walked 3 steps before she heard the rustle of wool. She stopped, turning back. The girls had scrambled out of the SUV. They stood in the rain looking like misplaced porcelain dolls on the oil-stained pavement. Come on, Claire muttered, rubbing the bridge of her nose. My car is over there. The interior of Claire's 2004 Honda Civic smelled of stale smoke and damp dog, though she hadn't owned a dog in 5 years. The heater only worked on the passenger side, and it squealed like a dying pig when she turned it on. The girls sat in the back, rigid, their expensive coats soaking wet and smelling like wet sheep. I'm Mia, the bolder one said. This is Sophie. Claire, she replied, keeping her eyes on the road. The windshield wipers smeared the rain rather than clearing it. Your car's very loud, Sophie whispered. It gets me to work. Claire gripped the steering wheel. The plastic was tacky under her fingers. She hated that they noticed the noise. She hated that she felt defensive. They were 7. It took 20 minutes to reach her apartment complex. It was a cinder block monstrosity on the edge of town, surrounded by a chain-link fence that had bowed outward from the weight of overgrown blackberry bushes. The security light in the parking lot was shot out. Claire killed the engine. We're going to my apartment. We wait for the cops there. Don't touch anything in the stairwell. She led them up 3 flights of concrete stairs. The air smelled of boiled cabbage, cheap weed, and damp rot. Mia held tightly to Sophie's hand. They stepped over a crushed beer can as if it were a dead rat. Claire unlocked her door and pushed it open. Her apartment was tiny. A kitchen that bled into a living room, a single window looking out at a brick wall. There was a mattress on the floor in the corner, covered in a faded fleece blanket. In the center of the room, on a cheap particle board TV stand, was a framed photograph of a little boy with gapped teeth. Leo. Claire walked past the photo, turning the frame face down. She couldn't bear to look at him right now. "Take off your shoes. Put them on the mat," Claire ordered. The girls obeyed, stepping out of leather boots that cost more than Claire made in a week. They stood in their stocking feet, shivering, looking around the dim room. The wallpaper near the ceiling was peeling in long, jaundiced strips. "Are you poor?" Sophie asked. Her voice was innocent, devoid of malice. It was just a question. Claire stopped halfway to the kitchen. Her jaw tightened until her teeth ached. A hot, ugly spike of shame flared in her chest, followed instantly by defensive rage. She forced a breath out through her nose. "Yes," Claire said, turning around. "I am. Sit on the couch. It's clean." The couch was a cast-off from a thrift store, covered in a brown corduroy slipcover. The girls climbed onto it, pulling their knees to their chests. "I'm hungry," Mia said quietly. Claire opened her fridge. The light bulb was dead. Inside sat a half-empty carton of milk, a jar of pickles, and a brick of cheap cheddar cheese. She looked in the pantry. 2 boxes of generic macaroni and cheese. "You eat mac and cheese?" Claire asked. Mia nodded. Sophie just stared at the peeling wallpaper. Claire filled a dented aluminum pot with tap water and set it on the electric stove. The burner smoked for a second, burning off old grease, before glowing a dull, angry orange. As she waited for the water to boil, she watched them. They were so pristine. Even wet and terrified, their hair was perfectly cut, their skin clear, their clothes tailored. They belonged to a different species. Claire remembered buying Leo a winter coat from the Goodwill bin. It had a tear in the lining. She had sewn it with dental floss because she didn't have thread. She poured the dried pasta into the boiling water. The steam rose, smelling faintly of cardboard and salt. "Where is your mom?" Claire asked, leaning against the counter, crossing her arms. "At a conference in Seattle," Mia said. "She had to work. We were staying with our nanny, but she got sick, so Frank was driving us to our aunt's house in Portland." "Frank is your driver?" "Yes." Claire stirred the pasta with a wooden spoon. The wood was splintered at the handle. "What does your mom do to afford a driver?" "She's a judge," Sophie piped up, finding her voice. "She tells bad people what to do." Claire's hand stopped. The wooden spoon scraped against the bottom of the aluminum pot with a sharp, grating screech. She didn't know why her stomach suddenly dropped. There were dozens of judges in the state. Hundreds. But a cold sweat broke out across her forehead. The air in the tiny apartment suddenly felt too thick to breathe. She drained the pasta in the sink, the steam clouding her vision, and mixed in the bright neon orange cheese powder. She scooped it into 2 plastic bowls and walked over to the couch, handing one to each girl. "Thank you," Mia said politely. "You got a phone? A tablet? Anything to call her?" Claire asked. Her voice sounded thin, hollow. "In my backpack," Mia said, pointing to a small leather knapsack she had dragged in with her. "But it's dead. The battery died in the car." "Let me see it," Claire said. Mia pulled the bag onto her lap, unzipping it. She bypassed a dead iPad and pulled out a leather-bound planner. "Mom's emergency numbers are in the back. Her assistant's number." Mia held out the planner. Claire took it. The leather was supple, expensive. On the front, embossed in small gold foil letters, was a name. Honor Madeline Hayes. Claire didn't breathe. Her lungs forgot how to expand. She stared at the gold lettering until the light in the room seemed to bend and warp around the edges of the planner. Madeline Hayes. The smell of the neon orange cheese suddenly turned her stomach. She backed away from the couch, her knees hitting the edge of the particle board TV stand. The photograph of Leo, lying face down, rattled against the wood. 14 months ago. The county courthouse. Room 4B. It smelled of floor wax and old paper. Claire had been wearing her only suit, bought from a clearance rack, the sleeves an inch too short. She remembered the suffocating weight of the panic in her chest as the lawyer, a public defender who kept checking his watch, mumbled through her financial realities. "My client has secured night employment, Your Honor. She is trying to catch up on the arrears." And then a voice from the bench, crisp, bored, cultivated. "Trying doesn't pay rent, Mr. Davis, nor does it provide a stable environment for a 5-year-old child. 3 evictions in 2 years, utilities shut off. This isn't a case of bad luck. It's a pattern of systemic instability." Claire remembered looking up at the bench. Judge Madeline Hayes. Her hair had been pulled back into a severe, elegant twist. Her reading glasses rested on the bridge of her nose. She hadn't looked at Claire with pity or anger. She had looked at her the way one looks at a math problem that doesn't balance. Custody is transferred to the father. The mother is granted visitation every other weekend, contingent on maintaining a verified, permanent address. Gavel, a single piece of wood striking a block, a sound no louder than a dropped book, and Claire's entire life was severed. Leo screaming as his father carried him out, the smell of the cheap wool of her suit jacket, the hollow ringing in her ears. Claire looked up from the leather planner. Mia and Sophie were eating their macaroni. Sophie had gotten a bit of orange cheese on the corner of her mouth. She looked exactly like her mother. The same sharp jawline, the same calculating dark eyes, though currently softened by youth and fatigue. These are her children. The realization hit Claire like a physical blow. The world tilted. The air in the room felt venomous. She looked at their cashmere coats piled near the door. She looked at their leather boots. She looked at the peeling wallpaper of the apartment she was barely holding on to. The apartment she rented just so she could have a permanent address to see Leo 4 days a month. Madeline Hayes slept in a house with a working furnace. She hired men named Frank to drive her children in silver SUVs. While Claire scrubbed diner floors at 2 a.m. to scrape together bus fare, Madeline Hayes was at a conference in Seattle, sipping bottled water and deciding whose lives to ruin next. "Claire!" Mia's voice snapped her back. Claire blinked. The edges of her vision were dark. Her hands were shaking violently. She dropped the leather planner onto the counter. It landed with a heavy, wet smack against a dishcloth. "What?" Claire managed to say. It came out as a growl. The girl shrank back. Mia put her plastic bowl down on the cushion next to her. "Are you okay? You look mad." Claire closed her eyes. "Throw them out," a dark, vicious voice hissed in her brain. "Put them back in the hallway. Let them see what it feels like. Let Madeline Hayes feel a fraction of the terror you felt when you walked out of that courtroom with empty hands." She opened her eyes. The girls were terrified. They were clutching each other again, their shoulders hunched. They weren't a judge. They were 7. But looking at them made Claire sick. She turned away, bracing her hands against the edge of the kitchen sink. The aluminum edge bit into her palms. She stared down at the drain. "I'm fine," Claire forced through her teeth. "Eat your food." She needed to call the police. She needed to get them out of her apartment immediately. If Madeline Hayes found out her daughters were in the custody of a woman she had deemed systemically unstable, A woman with a grudge. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the anger. Kidnapping. That's what Hayes would call it. She wouldn't see a rescue. She would see retaliation. Claire had taken 2 minors from a vehicle without police authorization. She had brought them to an undisclosed location. A rusted car, a dark highway, a dingy apartment. Claire's breath began to hitch. She grabbed her cracked phone from her pocket and dialed 911 again. County Dispatch. I called earlier, Claire said, her voice frantic, a desperate whisper as she turned her back to the girls. About the kids in the Lexus on Route 9. I took them. I brought them to my house. Because it was cold. Ma'am, I told you to wait for a unit, the dispatcher said, his voice sharpening with annoyance. What is your address? Claire gave it. All right. The highway is completely gridlocked. I've got state troopers trying to clear a path. Do not leave that apartment. Do not move the children. A unit will be there when it can. Give me your name. Claire Miller. Okay, Claire, sit tight. The line clicked dead. Claire lowered the phone. I was trapped. She couldn't leave, and the police weren't coming anytime soon. She was locked in a tiny, rotting box with the most dangerous things in the world. The children of the woman who held the power to take away the last remaining pieces of her life. She turned around. Mia had unzipped her backpack further. She pulled out a small plush rabbit. The fur was worn flat in places, the ear mended with clumsy stitches. My mom fixed it, Mia said, catching Claire staring. She's not very good at sewing, but she tried. Claire stared at the rabbit. She thought of the dental floss she used on Leo's coat. A jagged laugh escaped her throat, sharp and bitter. No, Claire whispered, the sound devoid of humor. I imagine she isn't. She walked over to the window, pressing her forehead against the cold condensation-slicked glass. The rain lashed against the pane, a violent, chaotic drumming. She had to survive the next few hours without losing her mind. And more importantly, without giving Madeline Hayes the ammunition to destroy her for good. Behind her, she heard the soft scrape of plastic spoons against bowls. Just keep them safe, Claire told herself, closing her eyes against the darkness of the alleyway outside. Keep them safe, hand them over, and disappear. But as she heard a soft, muffled sniffle from the couch, Claire knew nothing in her life was ever that simple. By 3:42 a.m., the adrenaline had burned off, leaving behind a thick, toxic sludge of exhaustion. The only sounds in the apartment were the hum of the dying refrigerator and the erratic, wet rattle of the rain against the glass. Mia had finally closed her eyes, her head resting on the arm of the corduroy couch. Sophie, however, was awake. She was curled into a tight ball, her knees pulled up to her chin, shivering violently. Claire watched her from the kitchen counter. She hadn't moved in 20 minutes. Her legs were cramped, her lower back screaming in protest from the diner shift. But she refused to sit on the floor. She refused to look comfortable in her own home, while Madeline Hayes' bloodline occupied her furniture. I don't feel good, Sophie whispered. It was a fragile, papery sound. Claire exhaled, a long, ragged breath through her nose. She pushed off the counter. The cheap linoleum stuck slightly to the rubber soles of her damp sneakers. She walked over to the couch and placed the back of her hand against Sophie's forehead. She was burning up. Claire pulled her hand back as if the child's skin were electrified. A low-grade fever, probably from sitting in a freezing car for an hour, compounded by terror. Stay here, Claire said flatly. She walked into the bathroom. It was barely larger than a closet. A naked bulb hung over a sink stained with hard water deposits. The air smelled of mildew and the harsh bleach she used to fight it. Claire opened the medicine cabinet. The hinges screamed, a sharp metallic squeal. Inside sat a tube of generic toothpaste, a half-empty box of tampons, and a plastic bin. Claire stared at the bin. Her chest tightened, the familiar iron band of grief constricting her lungs. It was Leo's box. She kept it exactly as it had been 14 months ago. She hadn't thrown it away because throwing it away meant accepting the permanence of room 4B. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the bin down. Inside was a Spider-Man toothbrush, a tube of bubblegum-flavored paste, and a plastic bottle of children's ibuprofen. She pulled the bottle out. The liquid inside was a thick neon orange. The cap was crusted with dried, sticky residue from the last time Leo had an ear infection. 2 weeks before the court date. 2 weeks before Madeline Hayes told her that her poverty was a systemic failure of motherhood. "Let her burn," the dark voice whispered in the back of Claire's mind. "Let her sweat. It's a fever. She won't die. Let her mother deal with the hospital bill. You owe them nothing." Claire gripped the plastic bottle, the edges of the child-proof cap dug into her palm. She looked at herself in the spotted mirror. Her hair was pulled back into a messy, greasy knot. Dark circles hung under her eyes like bruises. Her skin looked gray. She looked exactly like the woman Judge Hayes had seen. A statistic, a failure, a hazard. With a vicious twist, Claire snapped the child-proof cap open. She rinsed a small plastic dosing cup under the faucet, dried it on her jeans, and poured the thick liquid to the 10-milliliter line. She walked back into the living room. "Sit up," Claire told Sophie. The little girl uncurled slowly, her eyes glassy. "Drink this. It tastes like garbage, but it'll bring your temperature down." Sophie took the small cup with 2 shaking hands. She sniffed it, wrinkled her nose, and swallowed it in 1 gulp. She gagged slightly, handing the sticky cup back. "Thank you," Mia said softly from the other end of the couch. She was awake again, watching Claire with dark, unreadable eyes. "Go to sleep," Claire muttered, heading back to the kitchen to wash the cup. "Do you have kids?" Mia asked. Claire stopped at the sink. The water was running over her hands, icy cold. "I have a son, Leo." "Where is he?" "With his dad." "Are you divorced?" "Something like that." Claire turned off the faucet. The silence roared back into the room. She dried her hands on a ragged dish towel. She didn't want to talk. She wanted to build a brick wall between herself and these girls. But the silence in the apartment was too loud, too suffocating. "My mom works a lot," Mia said, pulling the mended rabbit closer to her chest. "She's always tired. Sometimes she falls asleep in her work clothes on the sofa. Frank has to carry us to bed." Claire gripped the edge of the sink. She didn't want to hear this. She didn't want Madeline Hayes humanized. She wanted the cold, untouchable monolith in the black robe. She needed the villain to remain a villain. Hearing that Hayes fell asleep on the couch, exhausted, was a trespassing on Claire's own reality. "She has an important job," Claire said, the words tasting like copper in her mouth. "She says people rely on her to make the hard choices," Mia recited, as if she had memorized the line. "But people get mad at her. We have a security system at our house. A man threw a rock through our window once." I should have thrown a brick, Claire thought. "Go to sleep, Mia," Claire said, her voice cracking, betraying the tightrope walk of her sanity. "The police will be here when the road clears. Just shut your eyes." Mia nodded, lying back down. Within 10 minutes, the shallow, synchronized breathing of the twins filled the room. Claire didn't sleep. She sat on the floor, her back against the cheap front door, her knees pulled to her chest. She watched the hands on the wall clock tick past 4, then 5. The rain finally slowed, transforming into a thick, miserable drizzle. The darkness in the apartment began to lift, replaced by the bruised gray light of a suffocating dawn. Claire's joints ached with a deep, bone-weary throb. She had a shift at a grocery store starting at noon. She was going to be running on fumes and spite. At 6:14 a.m., the heavy silence of the hallway was broken. It wasn't a knock. It was the heavy, authoritative squeak of thick rubber soles on wet concrete. A radio squawked, a brief burst of static and clipped dispatch codes. Claire stood up slowly. Her legs felt like lead. She looked at the girls. They were still asleep on the corduroy cushions. Someone hammered on the door. 3 loud, aggressive strikes that rattled the loose hinges. "Police department. Open the door." Claire unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The hallway was filled with large men. 2 uniformed state troopers, their yellow rain slickers dripping water onto the ratty carpet. A plainclothes detective stood behind them, a badge clipped to his belt. And pushing past them, moving with a frantic, desperate violence, was Madeline Hayes. She didn't look like a judge. She wore a rumpled beige trench coat thrown over what looked like pajama pants and a sweater. Her hair, usually perfectly coiled, hung in limp, damp strands around her face. Her makeup was gone, revealing pale skin and terrified, bloodshot eyes. She didn't even look at Claire. She shoved past her, nearly knocking Claire into the wall. Her eyes scanning the tiny apartment. "Mia! Sophie!" The scream was guttural. It was the sound of an animal finding its young. The girls bolted upright on the couch. Before they could even rub the sleep from their eyes, Madeline was on her knees in front of the thrift store sofa, crushing them to her chest. She was sobbing, loud and ugly, burying her face in their cashmere coats. "Mommy!" Sophie cried, wrapping her arms around her mother's neck. Claire stood by the open door. The troopers watched her, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. They were assessing the threat. They looked at the peeling wallpaper, the mattress on the floor, the stark poverty of the room. Claire knew exactly what they saw. They saw a motive for ransom. They saw a desperate, dangerous woman. "Are you Claire Miller?" the detective asked, stepping into the apartment. He didn't take off his shoes. He tracked black mud onto her cheap rug. "Yes," Claire said, keeping her voice dead level. "You found the vehicle at the diner?" "Yes." "Why didn't you wait for the unit?" His tone was accusatory, an interrogation. "The car was dead. They were freezing. Dispatch said it would be 4 hours," Claire said. She pointed a shaking finger at the couch. "Ask them. I fed them generic macaroni and gave the little one ibuprofen for a fever. That's the extent of my criminal enterprise." Madeline Hayes pulled back from her daughters. She framed their faces in her hands, checking them for bruises, for trauma. "Are you hurt? Did she hurt you?" she whispered frantically. "No," Mia said, her voice thick with sleep. "She gave us food. Her car is really loud." Madeline let out a shuddering breath. She stood up, smoothing her trench coat with trembling hands. She wiped the tears from her face, her posture stiffening as the raw panic began to solidify back into authority. She turned to look at Claire for the first time. The judge's eyes swept over Claire's greasy hair, The cheap puffer jacket, the exhausted, hollowed-out face. "I don't know how to thank you," Madeline said. Her voice was raspy, but the cultivated, crisp cadence was returning. It was the voice that delivered verdicts. When state police found the Lexus abandoned and Frank wandering the highway with a head injury, I thought I had lost them. Madeline reached into the deep pocket of her coat. She pulled out a leather checkbook. "I know the police said you just brought them here to stay warm, but I understand how the world works. I want to compensate you for your time, for keeping them safe." She clicked a silver pen. "What is a number that would make a difference for you, Miss Miller?" The detective looked away, pretending not to watch the transaction. The troopers stood like statues. Claire stared at the checkbook. The leather matched the planner sitting on her kitchen counter. The silver pen glinted in the harsh light of the exposed hallway bulb. A number that would make a difference. $10,000. 20. It would buy her a real apartment, a reliable car, a lawyer to petition for custody. It was salvation, wrapped in condescension. Claire felt a hot, venomous laugh rising in her throat. She swallowed it down, but the bitterness coated her tongue. "Put it away," Claire said. Madeline paused, the pen hovering over the paper. "Miss Miller, please. I am incredibly grateful. I have resources. Let me help you. Clearly you could use—" She stopped herself, but her eyes flicked to the peeling wallpaper. "Clearly," Claire finished for her. Her voice dropped an octave. It was no longer flat. It was serrated. Claire walked slowly away from the door, moving toward the center of the room. She stopped 2 feet away from the judge. Madeline was taller, but Claire didn't look up. She locked eyes with the woman. "I don't want your money," Claire said quietly, so the girls on the couch wouldn't hear. "I didn't do it for you." Madeline frowned, a slight crease appearing between her perfectly shaped brows. "I don't understand." "No, you wouldn't." Claire tilted her head. "Take a good look, Your Honor. Look at the room." Madeline recoiled slightly at the title. Her eyes darted around the apartment again, confused, searching for a threat. "Do I know you?" 14 months ago, Claire said, her voice a slow, deliberate drumbeat. "County Courthouse, Room 4B. You told my public defender that trying doesn't pay rent. You told me that my poverty wasn't a matter of bad luck, but a pattern of systemic instability." Madeline's breath hitched. The color drained completely from her face, leaving her skin the color of old ash. Her eyes widened, the silver pen trembling in her grip. "You took my son, Leo," Claire said, stepping 1 inch closer. She could smell the vanilla perfume on Madeline's coat, souring with stale sweat. "You gave him to his father because I was 2 months behind on rent and living in a place just like this." The silence in the apartment was absolute. Even the rain had stopped. The troopers in the hallway shifted uncomfortably, sensing the sudden, catastrophic shift in the room's gravity, but unsure of how to intervene. "Oh, my God," Madeline whispered. The checkbook slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a dull slap. "I recognize their coats," Claire lied. She wanted it to hurt. She wanted Madeline to feel the blade. "When I saw the name in the planner, I thought about leaving them in the hallway. I thought about letting you feel exactly what it's like to sit by a phone, knowing strangers have the power to decide if your children are safe." Madeline staggered back half a step, hitting the edge of the particle board TV stand. She looked terrified, not of a kidnapper, but of the ghost she had created. "But I brought them inside," Claire continued, her voice breaking on the last word. She forced her jaw tight, refusing to cry. I gave them my son's medicine, because I am a mother. And no matter what you stamped on a piece of paper, my inability to afford a silver Lexus doesn't make me a monster. It just makes me tired. Madeline stared at Claire. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The judicial armor was gone. There was only a devastating, horrifying realization. The woman she had legally destroyed had just handed her world back to her, perfectly intact. Get out of my house, Claire said. She turned her back on the judge and walked toward the kitchen. Madeline didn't speak. She knelt down, her hands shaking violently as she helped the girls into their wet cashmere coats. She zipped them up, her breathing shallow and ragged. She took Mia's hand, then Sophie's. Thank you, Claire, Mia said as they walked toward the door. Claire didn't turn around. She kept her hands planted on the edge of the aluminum sink, staring down at the drain. Come on, girls, Madeline whispered. Her voice was broken, defeated. The heavy footsteps moved out into the hallway. The troopers followed. The detective was the last to leave, pausing to pull the door shut. The deadbolt clicked. Claire stood alone in the silence. The apartment smelled of damp wool, orange cheese powder, and expensive vanilla. On the floor by the TV stand, Madeline's leather checkbook lay abandoned on the cheap rug. Claire walked over to the TV stand. She ignored the checkbook. She reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the photograph of Leo. She turned it face up. He was smiling, his gap-toothed grin bright and unfiltered. She traced her thumb over the glass. Her back still ached. She still had to walk to the bus stop in the rain. She was still poor. But as she looked at the peeling wallpaper and the mattress on the floor, the suffocating weight that had crushed her chest for 14 months felt just a fraction lighter. She set the frame back on the stand, upright, and went to get ready for work. If Claire's story hit you right in the chest, don't scroll away just yet. Hit that like button to show your support for the unseen struggles of single mothers everywhere. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that true strength isn't about the money in your bank account, but the choices you make in the dark. And make sure to subscribe to our channel for more raw, grounded storytelling that doesn't shy away from reality.